the air with a slow-moving disaster, the intense flooding that we're seeing along the Mississippi River tonight, with water levels going up, hail coming down, not just in the Midwest, but in one of America's most beloved national parks. We're going to have live reports from Iowa and California. Plus, it's like a scene out of the Shawshank Redemption, a man who escaped from jail on the run after allegedly killing a man, getting into a shootout with police that ended in a building on fire. 3 more inmates still on the run, what we're hearing just now from the county sheriff. Also new tonight, Disney taking its battle with Florida's governor to a whole new level, suing Ron DeSantis for, in their words, weaponizing government power. It's happening as the governor's on a world tour in Jerusalem. We're live there tonight. Plus, new regrets from Steven Spielberg, why he wishes he didn't edit out guns for ET's re-release, and what it says about this broader conversation on changing classic stuff to fit a modern lens. And welcome to New York, Aaron Rodgers. It's been waiting for you. Why the controversial quarterback's keeping the focus on football for now. Later in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and as we're coming on the air tonight, 24 million people are bracing for terrible weather from the Midwest out to Florida. We're talking golf ball-sized hail, even some tornadoes possible in just the next few hours. You see some of that hail coming down. Big cities like Dallas, Fort Worth, Wichita Falls, right in the bullseye. The Texas governor just activated emergency responders there. We're even seeing some hail coming down on the east side of Florida. I mean, look at that. This much hail there, that is very rare. You don't see that every day. In the Midwest, what our climate union is calling a slow-moving disaster. You can see this, the Mississippi River getting tons of water from all the snow melt from up north, raising the river to historic levels. It's creeping up on a park right along the river in Wisconsin here. In Davenport, Iowa, crews are out trying to build these heavy-duty flood walls. You can see them there. About an hour north of that, Dubuque is closing all of its floodgates for only the 3rd time in 50 years. It is only going to get worse, as many of these towns are not even close to peak water level yet. Look at this map here. La Crosse in Wisconsin is expected to crest tomorrow. Dubuque Saturday, Davenport and Burlington on Monday. Out west in California, all of Yosemite Valley will shut down starting Friday because of the risk of flooding there. That's because it's supposed to warm up really quickly, and there's a bunch of snow that could melt. You can see here where Yosemite National Park, the Central Sierra right now, has about 2.5 times the average amount of snow this time of year. The Southern Sierras have 3 times as much, Northern twice as much. Bottom line, it's a lot of snow. It needs somewhere to go when it melts. Steve Patterson is in California watching that. But first, I want to get to Maggie Vespa, who's in Davenport, Iowa, on that flooding from the Mississippi River. Talk to us about what you're seeing, right? Because it is not typically with these weather live shots, you're like, oh, the wind, the rain, the hail, the snow. It's not a visual picture, right? It is slow moving inch by inch. But that's what makes this so scary.
Absolutely. I mean, it's counterintuitive to your point, but also in this case, the snow needs somewhere to go, right? We're not talking, as you say, about a fast-moving system that's dumping a ton of rain. We're talking, again, about snowpack, we're told by our climate unit in North Dakota and northern Minnesota, up to 18 inches of it that is slowly melting. And that's what's creating this. And Hallie, we knew this was coming, right? Like, our team came here for this reason, night before last. But even just seeing how far the water has encroached since we've been here, this has been really jarring. I'm standing on a road. This road runs back behind me here. That's next to a park that runs along the Mississippi. Typically, the Mississippi River, the waters from this river are hundreds of yards that way. You can see kind of the lamppost behind me. It gives you a little bit of an idea. And as you said, this area not expected to crest at the latest until Monday. People here, Hallie, they've been through floods. I mean, this is a river-adjacent community. This is a seasoned bunch. Even for them, they say this forecast is really scary. And watching the water encroach these last few days, Hallie, it's really starting to hit them that the danger simply is real.
Well, there are other impacts, too, like a gas company in the part of Iowa that you're in saying it's already turned off gas to 90 people. Doesn't sound like that many right now, but that number is expected to go up.
It's expected to go up, and people tell us that's never happened before. Again, they've been through floods, and this is a low-lying area that we're talking about. These are homes that tend to flood if anywhere does. And one woman said, I've been here for over a decade. We went through a horrific flood in 2019. This has never happened. And the gas company is turning these service off for people with like 3 to 4 hours notice. It's like it has to go right now because the danger is that severe. Listen to what people told us just after getting that notice yesterday.
No reason was given. You know, you get kind of upset when they're going to take something away from you because they don't even explain why.
And again, people knowing that we still have days to go. We're in Davenport, Iowa. It's expected to crest here on Monday. Other parts up along the Mississippi, kind of closer maybe to Friday over the weekend. But we have 5 days here. This is Wednesday. And people here in this city hearing things like that, hearing gas is being cut off, hearing they should make an evacuation plan, they should pack a kit to be away potentially for days. They're starting to ask really practical questions like, where do I go? Who pays for it? And what do I do when I come back? And we've just, again, never seen this level of destruction before. So, again, it's just hitting this area, Hallie, that this could be historic.
Maggie Vespa, I'm glad you're there watching it all for us. Thank you. I want to bring in Steve Patterson now, who's covering what's going down out in California. Different region, right? Different system, but same issue. The snow needs somewhere to go when it melts. Yosemite put this warning out early. I imagine people now are leaving the park, leaving the valley. What is the expectation for there and when the concern is going to get really intense?
Different region, same problem, as you mentioned, Hallie. And the concern really is that we're talking about a Great Lake size of water hanging above us here in California in the Sierra Mountains. That map that you showed, so illustrative of what could happen. You're talking about twice the amount of water for every reservoir in the state of California as snowpack right now, more than 256% of what it normally is. And of course, it has to come down. It will come down, no question. It will flood communities, no question. It will destroy homes, no question. The questions really now are when and where. When, we don't know. It really depends on the weather. If we get a good heat wave, it's going to come down faster. That's why you're seeing what's happening in Yosemite, because they're really concerned about all that snow melt. But what are the weather patterns going to look like moving forward? We simply don't know. It's expected to get cooler and then hotter and cooler again. So it could come down all at once. It could come down as a trickle. What we do know is where it's going to hit. Tulare Basin, a place that we've been showing these images of flooded homes and farmland for the past few weeks or so. That place is going to get hit because it's essentially a natural lake bed. Already 600 homes there affected, 37 destroyed. Governor Newsom was in that area the other day. But it also could hit a place like Stockton, California, where the levees have been so rough for so long. There's been so much disinvestment from floodplain protection, from the levees, because we've been funneling that money into drought, of course, and maybe rightfully so, because we've been in this 23-year mega drought, now suddenly ended by this historic possible rain event that is going to smack us all once over again. And so the question is, where do we reinforce? That is something that I think a lot of meteorologists are looking at, but we simply don't know until we find out what these weather patterns are going to do over the next few months or so.
That is for sure. Steve Patterson, thanks for watching all of it for us. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
To Mississippi now, where you're about to see the all-hands-on-deck wild scene after police closed in on a guy who escaped from jail and then may have killed a pastor while on the run, setting off a multi-state manhunt, ending with a shootout from a burning building. That is quite the sentence to digest. The suspect's name, Dylan Arrington, 22 years old, now believed to be dead. He'd been charged with stealing a car and having a firearm as a convicted felon. One of 4 inmates on the run after escaping from a jail in Mississippi. But unlike the others, investigators say he killed 62-year-old Pastor Anthony Watts. We've got this surveillance video in from our station down near Jackson. You see it here. Police say a man crashed his motorcycle and fell down this hill. Okay, you see that. Then you're going to see a red pickup truck. It's backing up. That's where they say they found Watts' body. Here's what we know tonight. Police say they believe Arrington, the escaped inmate, started firing at them, then barricaded himself inside a building that then burst into flames. Now, we say they believe he's dead because they haven't confirmed it's his body just yet. We also know that a public works truck from Hinds County, where Jackson is, somehow turned up around Houston. As for the other 3 escapees, still on the run. Katie Beck is following this story for us from Virginia. Katie, the sheriff is confident they're on the right track to find these other escaped inmates, but he's confirming to our team just in the last hour or so that they've had trouble with inmates breaking out, right?
Yeah, this prison before has had serious problems with people getting out. And the reason for that, he says, is because it's an outdated facility that is also understaffed. They've had escapees as recent as last Christmas and in years prior to that. Some of them have been returned. Some of them have not. The sheriff said this is an ongoing problem that they're aware of, but it's simply difficult to staff a facility that is this large and to maintain it with the funds that they have. Here's what he told us about that.
In the past, there have been escapes from the facility, And some of this is due to the physical plant, the condition of the facility, as well as the staffing issues that we have continued to face over the last several years.
The sheriff saying that they have about 50 vacancies for staff right now at that facility. He explained that these inmates basically went through the ceiling of a cell and then out the roof of the facility, and that they actually went out separately to sort of go undetected. It wasn't until the morning after that they did a head count and realized all 4 of them had gone missing.
You're getting reaction, I know, from people in the neighborhood on this pastor who just so many people loved and who they're grieving tonight. Anthony Watts, tell us more.
Yeah, Watts was beloved by his daughter and by his fellow parishioners. There's been lots of outpouring about what a great person he was, and obviously this last act of kindness sort of illustrates that. He saw what he thought was a stranded motorist on the side of the road and stopped to try and be helpful, and was shot and killed in the process. His daughter putting out a statement saying he did not know a lot of people, or kind of a quiet, soft-spoken guy, but what he said was meaningful and powerful and impactful, and that he's going to be greatly missed. So somewhere in this complicated escape story is a very tragic loss for that community.
Katie Beck, thank you very much for that reporting. So listen, some new polling just out to NBC News in the last 60 minutes is showing how divided we all are over the so-called culture wars, something that's probably going to be a huge theme in the presidential election coming up. Half of us say we should be promoting greater respect for traditional social and moral values. 42% of us say there should be more tolerance for people who live a different way. That split, probably critical to anybody trying to keep or take the White House in 2024, including President Biden, who today is talking about another focus for voters, according to polling, whether or not he's too old to serve a second term. Listen.
One of the things that people are going to find out, they're going to see a race, and they're going to judge whether or not I have it or don't have it. I respect them taking a hard look at it. I take a hard look at it as well. I took a hard look at it before I decided to run, and I feel good.
That coming as more than 2/3 of the voters who do not want President Biden to run again tell us his age is at least part of the reason for that, a major or minor part. NBC's Kayla Tausche is joining us now. Interesting to hear from President Biden on this. As Mary Bruce from ABC, who asked him that question, referenced, often when he's asked about his age, he says, oh, watch me. Right. But the point is, people are watching. This is where the polling is. And now he's issuing what I think is not the first, probably, defense of his age that he's going to be giving over the next couple of 18 months.
Yeah, he's going to find himself defending his age often, and you can bet that his aides are going to try to put him in situations where he's presented in a favorable light, not, say, biking in Delaware, where he fell last summer, and there were a lot of questions raised about his health at that time then. But I think, Hallie, ultimately what President Biden and his aides are going to try to want to do is make this a referendum on former President Donald Trump. Here's something else President Biden said today on that front.
I know him well, and I know the danger he presents to our democracy, and we've been down this road before. I think I still would be running if he wasn't. I do know him well. He's not hard to know.
Now, as for those culture war issues, I mean, the polls you referenced show that there's basically no middle ground for voters. Take treatment of transgender people, for instance. 48% of respondents say the country has gone too far in accepting transgender people, while 43% say the country has not gone far enough in ending transgender discrimination. And then on this subject of wokeness, if a company or a person were deemed woke, 51% of respondents said they'd have a less favorable opinion of them, whereas 27% say they'd have a more favorable opinion. But when I talk to White House officials and campaign officials, I think the belief is that those are views of each party's political base, but the election is going to be won at the margins. They believe the independent voter, the swing voter, believes that abortion should be legal. That the independent and swing voter believes that there should be more LGBT rights. After all, marriage equality passed in a lame duck session with bipartisan support. So certainly aides believe that while culture wars will figure prominently, that perhaps the election will be won on other issues.
Kayla Tausche outside the White House for us. Kayla, it's great to see you tonight. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So listen, an extraordinary escalation tonight in the Disney versus DeSantis battle with Florida's biggest tourist attraction, one of the most popular places in the world, out with a new lawsuit today against the state that it's in. Disney, yes, suing the Republican governor for basically, they say, punishing the company for having an opinion against DeSantis' so-called Don't Say Gay law. Or in corporate speak, you see it here, this is how Disney put it, a relentless campaign to weaponize government power against Disney in retaliation for expressing a political viewpoint. Disney's essentially saying that Ron DeSantis and his team are retaliating hard against the company for speaking out against him, which they say violates Disney's right to free speech and hurts its business. This lawsuit is the latest and most significant move in a back-and-forth beef that's been going on for months, punctuated by DeSantis' threat that could make the happiest place on earth a little more annoying, like possibly building new toll booths, doing more inspections on rides, maybe even letting a state prison get built right near Disney's land. This latest twist comes as the governor seems to be inching closer to declaring himself a candidate for president. Right now, he's on a worldwide tour to visit some of America's closest allies, trying to show he can hold his own on the world stage. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is traveling with Governor DeSantis in Jerusalem. And this is so interesting, Gabe. Like, there you are in Israel as we're talking about what's happening in Orlando and Tallahassee, right? And I mean, these are the dots that are getting connected because of Ron DeSantis, Disney, and his political ambitions.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. This ongoing feud with Disney threatening to overshadow Governor Ron DeSantis' overseas trip, which, as you mentioned, he's been to Japan, South Korea, now coming here to Israel, and then heading to the UK later in this week. But here's the ironic part about this, Hallie. He keeps touting how he has been to these countries to attract businesses to Florida, and yet today this lawsuit from the largest single-site employer in Florida suing the governor. And as you mentioned, you laid it out quite well, but let's take a look at some of this lawsuit. This does not happen every day. A massive company like Disney suing the sitting governor of a state, saying, quote, a targeted campaign of government retaliation orchestrated at every step by Governor DeSantis as punishment for Disney's protected speech, now threatens Disney's business operations. And as you said, Hallie, this has the potential to drag on well into the 2024 presidential race. Just a short time ago, a couple of days ago, actually, I believe it was last week, Governor DeSantis floated the idea of potentially building a state prison nearby Disney World. And there are certain other things on the table. For example, more inspections of the beloved monorails at Disney. So this can go on for quite some time, Hallie. Again, not every day that you hear a massive company like this attack a sitting governor, a Republican governor, who claims to be very pro-business in the state. That's been part of his pitch and would be part of his pitch of any presidential campaign. How many residents and businesses he has attracted to Florida, now facing this lawsuit, Hallie.
Tell me more about the sort of world tour part of this whole thing, because you've been traveling with him to the countries that we're about to show folks on screen here. It is, you know, the UK, Israel, South Korea, Japan. It is an unorthodox, let's say, kickoff to a presidential campaign to be embarking on a tour like this while at the same time having a feud with one of your state's, you know, biggest businesses and sort of most important tourist attractions here. Talk me through some of this and the response that we're seeing, which I thought was fascinating. Oh, I'm sorry, Gabe. I just want to say Nikki Haley, who is officially running for president, coming out with like a monster troll.
Yeah, and look, for the record, I want to say I have not been traveling with the governor in the first two stops on this overseas tour. He went to Japan, South Korea. Now he's heading to Israel. We're expecting a high-stakes speech tomorrow at a conference commemorating the 75th anniversary of Israel's independence, an issue that Governor DeSantis, frankly, has made quite a huge issue over the last several years, in that his support for Israel. He was here several years ago, not only as governor, but before that as a congressman, scouting sites for the moving of the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. So this is an issue he has talked about before. However, yes, as you said, now you can't avoid politics here. The Florida governor widely expected to announce his run for president potentially as early as next month when the Florida legislature wraps up. And this is already becoming a huge issue in the 2024 campaign. As you said, Nikki Haley, the former South Carolina governor, just moments after this lawsuit was announced, she fired back at Ron DeSantis when she was asked about it on another network. But she also tweeted, she said, hey, Disney, my home state will happily accept your 70,000 plus jobs if you want to leave Florida. We've got great weather, great people, and it's always a great day in South Carolina. So South Carolina is not woke, but we're not sanctimonious about it either. Of course, Hallie, a not-so-subtle dig at the favored nickname of Governor Ron DeSantis by former President Trump, who also, by the way, has slammed him for his ongoing feud with Disney. And that is what some Republicans that I've been speaking with, I was down in Florida last week, they can't seem to understand why a supposedly pro-business Republican governor is making such a huge issue of this in his home state. If you talk to the DeSantis team, though, they see it as simply battling back against a so-called woke corporation. As you mentioned in a previous segment, the culture war is front and center as this campaign gets underway, Hallie.
It is all connected. Gabe Gutierrez, who is technically now traveling with Ron DeSantis as he embarks on the rest of his world tour here. Gabe, thank you very much. Glad to see you there live from Jerusalem. Appreciate it. China today announcing its former ambassador to Russia will head to Ukraine to try to negotiate what China's president calls a political settlement of the war. That's according to a Chinese government readout of a phone call, a big deal phone call, okay, between this guy, the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, and the Chinese president. With Zelensky saying in a tweet he hopes the long and meaningful conversation will give a powerful impetus to the development of our bilateral relations. But China's choice here, its selection of its former ambassador to Russia, has some critics wondering if China can really be an unbiased negotiator here. Keir Simmons is joining us now, and that is not to understate the significance of this call here between Zelensky and Xi, President Xi of China. But I think there is also an appropriate amount of skepticism that some people are bringing to the table as well.
There is, and I think there's a lot of posturing too, Hallie. You know, there will look. Let's give it to people straight here, right? There are going to be negotiations. In any war, there are already negotiations. America's going to be involved in those negotiations. China's going to be involved in those negotiations. What you're watching right now is kind of a game of poker. And if you think of it like that China just revealed a card. So this diplomat, Li Hu, 70 years old, he's been in Russia for decades, on and off. Back in 1981, he was the second secretary to the Chinese embassy in Moscow. He became the first secretary. He went to Kazakhstan. He went back to Beijing for a time. He was the Chinese ambassador to Russia for 10 years, from 2009 to 2019. And President Putin even awarded him a Russian Order of Friendship. We've got that picture, I think. You could call it the grip and grin with Putin, if you like. There he is. So we don't know when he's going to go to Ukraine, Li Hu, but I just spoke to an expert, a Russian expert, who knows him, describes him as fluent in Russian, says he reads classics like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, says he's not a kind of Chinese wolf warrior diplomat, angry on Twitter. He's really a negotiator, but says, look, Moscow's not going to be worried because this man really understands Russian politics. Here's the interesting thing. President Xi of China, Hallie, it looks like a very clever move because you indicate to Moscow with Li Hu, this diplomat, not to worry, we're sending your friend. At the same time, you signal to Europe by sending somebody that you want to get this solved.
Talk about the other diplomatic efforts, because you're right. There's a lot of pieces at play. It is a bit like a poker game. We are seeing a bit of China's card, but China's also playing, to torture the analogy, and pardon me, but China is playing the long game in this round of poker here.
Oh, yeah, really. I mean, we've seen China now involved in a negotiation, amazingly, between Saudi Arabia and Iran. We're seeing other signs of China trying to be involved in negotiations around the world. China has shifted. It's trying to be a diplomat. It's trying to be a big power going around the world solving problems. That's not to negate all of the criticisms that we all heard about China. But we did hear today from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in China saying China will not sit idly by when it comes to Ukraine, will not add fuel to the flame, nor will we pursue selfish gains out of the crisis. Again, there are going to be many folks who are going to question that. Whether or not China really can be neutral, really can be a negotiator. Here's another fundamental question here, really, Hallie.
Yeah.
You know, Russia says it won't withdraw. Ukraine says it will not give up territory. How are you going to solve that, Beijing? That is a fundamental problem. Right. But again, just back to my earlier point, in the end, there are going to have to be negotiations. And I think we can see pretty clearly at this stage, China's going to be involved.
Keir Simmons, thank you very much for that analysis and for that reporting. Appreciate it. Let's bring into the business world here because, boy, is there a big development as it relates to First Republic Bank. Look at its shares tanking something like 30% today. The trading of its stock had to be stopped like a dozen times. This is after a 50% drop yesterday, with this bank saying it really needs help. It needs help right now. Remember, there was a lot of talk, a big spotlight on First Republic after the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank about a month and a half ago. First Republic has already gotten a $30 billion bailout from the 11 other banks you see on screen here. Advisors are trying to convince him to come up with even more for First Republic. Brian Chung is joining us now. What does this mean, right? Like, help us take this out of the world of, God bless them, CNBC, and put him into the world of, like, why I should care sitting at my house here. This is a big deal.
Yeah, well, I mean, because it's bringing back the fears from about 6 weeks ago that maybe the banks are not in good shape. Now, for what it's worth, First Republic, the nexus for all of this was the earnings release that they had on Monday night, admitting that they lost about 40% of their deposits in the first 3 months of the year. That was way worse than the roughly 5% in deposit outflows that we saw in most of the other regional banks. That's according to Goldman Sachs Economics. That's the reason why the stock tanked yesterday, almost falling 50%, and then today falling almost another 30%. That stock, by the way, was almost $120 per share at the beginning of this year. So this is a stock that has really fallen a lot. Investors are not the depositors at this firm, and it's important to remember that if you are not banked at First Republic, you should not be concerned, because the deposit outflows that we've seen there are not happening at other regional banks. And again, as a reminder, for all FDIC insured institutions, your money is safe up to $250,000 per depositor. For most families, they're well below that limit, Hallie.
I was just going to have you just say, like, if you don't have money at First Republic Bank, you don't have to freak out here. And even if you do, I mean, there are some protections that are in place for this regional bank, Brian. I just think that's important to say, right?
Exactly. And worth mentioning as we continue to see these headlines, which might continue to crop up over the next few days, Hallie.
Brian Chung, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, a new study finds a lot of Americans are getting prescribed a maybe dangerous mix of drugs. We're taking a look at the risks and what you should watch out for. Plus, why former Theranos CEO Elizabeth Holmes is not, in fact, going to be reporting to prison tomorrow. That's later in The Local. A new study finds a whole bunch of people in this country are being treated with a potentially dangerous mix of drugs, amphetamines, prescribed alongside depression and anxiety meds. Researchers say that could lead to addiction or side effects we don't even know about yet, with the study's lead author warning that these prescription stimulants are highly potent, his words, and have a high potential for people to become dependent on them fast. Dr. Akshay Syal joins us now. Dr. Akshay, give us some, like, get real here, right? What kind of drugs are we talking about in these combos? Like, what are these cocktails and what's the danger here?
Hey, Hallie. So what we're looking at here are really Schedule II controlled substances. And for some context here, the DEA has a list of drugs that they classify into Schedule I, II, III, IV, or V based on their potential for abuse, and potential Class I being the most likely to be abused and Class V being the least. And so what we're talking about here are Level II substances like amphetamines or Adderall, oxycodone, fentanyl, some opiates, and even cocaine. I mean, what we're worried about here is people who are being prescribed stimulants, about almost 300,000 they found in this study, about half of them are also taking other substances on this list, such as antidepressants. And to answer your question, a real-life example, you know, if a patient comes in and they start taking an antidepressant, and that can bring them down a little bit, lower their energy, they can take a stimulant like Adderall to kind of come back up. And that's really what you're worried about is, you know, one drug bringing you down, another one bringing you back up. And what are really the side effects of that? That we don't know.
The new study showed that the way that people use these drugs, like patterns of using these drugs, go beyond what's actually been approved here. Now, that is not totally uncommon, right? There tends to be sometimes like off-label uses for different things. But does that raise any flags for you? What does that say here?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall in this country in general, we have a tendency to choose pills as a solution to problems, and it's hard to blame patients for that, right? For example, if you come in and you tell a doctor, I'm not feeling so great, I think I have depression, they say, would you want to see a therapist? And oftentimes we hear, you know, I don't have time for that. Is there something you can give me? Is there something that I can take over the counter? And, you know, I think that's where a lot of the problem is. And we're seeing, you know, over the last 2013 to 18, there was a study published that showed Adderall prescriptions were up 80%. So we're entering this world where we're turning to pills for a lot of our problems, and understandably so. The question is, when we start to add up a bunch of pills, what are the side effects of that? And really the most important advice I can give to your viewers right now is, if your doctor prescribes something, make sure you're really forthcoming in all the medications, all the over-the-counter supplements you're taking. We really want to watch for any potential interactions, Hallie.
It's an important conversation to have, Dr. Akshay, and I think it is also a sensitive one, right? Because we also know that medication can save lives. I mean, for things like depression, et cetera. I mean, that can be so critical for people, too.
Absolutely, absolutely. These drugs work. They work really well. Really, the warning is when you start to mix them together, what is the long-term data for that? And that's we really don't know.
Dr. Akshay Syal, great to see you. Thank you. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, new numbers in from the FBI shows active shooters killed or hurt more than 300 people last year. The report says while there were fewer incidents, the number of people shot was the highest it's been in 5 years. The deadliest, of course, that horrific attack at the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, that killed 21 people. Number 2, the British government says it's going to block Microsoft from buying Activision Blizzard. That's the company behind the huge Call of Duty franchise. It would have been the biggest ever gaming deal. But the UK said nope, because the merger, they say, would have been bad for competition. Microsoft plans to appeal. Number 3, the former New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, she's heading to Harvard. According to the school, she's going to take on some teaching roles focused on leadership starting in the fall. Earlier this year, Ardern stepped down as PM after 5 years because she said she no longer had enough in the tank to do it justice. Number 4, Chief Justice John Roberts is declining an invite to testify in front of the Senate about ethics rules for the Supreme Court. He says it would be exceedingly rare for him to appear. Senator Dick Durbin called the hearing after a report revealed Justice Clarence Thomas didn't disclose certain trips or gifts he got from a GOP megadonor for years. Number 5, hey, if you have now expired Bed Bath & Beyond coupons, don't throw them away just yet. You can use them at the Container Store for a limited time. The company says it's going to accept that now. Can we call them an iconic 20% off coupon? I don't know, popular coupon. Remember, today was the last day that Bed Bath & Beyond was going to accept the ever-present coupon. After it declared bankruptcy Sunday, it's going to sell off its inventory and close its stores. The Container Store, again, still in business, taking them. When we come back, Montana state lawmakers voting to punish one of their own, what they're trying to stop Zoe Zephyr from doing after a break. In Montana, Republican state lawmakers voting in just the last hour or so to punish the first openly trans lawmaker there, banning her from doing anything on the House floor for the rest of the legislative session. Zoe Zephyr just speaking on Meet the Press with our own Chuck Todd a couple of minutes ago. Listen.
There have been hearings and there have been moments on the floor where legislators have screamed in their closing, where legislators have insinuated that my very existence as a queer person is somehow sexualizing children. And we object to that.
Before the vote to punish her, Democrat Zoe Zephyr, who you just saw, had a chance to talk to her constituents for the first time from the House floor in days, after critics said she was silenced by her Republican colleagues. Listen.
When the Speaker asks me to apologize, what he is, on behalf of decorum, what he is really asking me to do is be silent when my community is facing bills that get us killed.
The Republican House Speaker says this is all about following the rules and that all representatives are free to participate in House debate while following the House rules. Remember, protesters supporting Zephyr stormed the state capitol this week over all of this. 7 of them arrested, starting after Zephyr gave a speech telling colleagues if they voted for a bill banning gender care for trans kids, that she hopes and thought they would see the blood on their hands when they bow their heads to pray. Conservatives there have since hit back at her for using what they call hateful rhetoric, even accusing her of inciting an insurrection. Kristen Dahlgren is joining us now. Kristen, bring us up to speed here. We covered the story of Zoe Zephyr about 24 hours ago here on this show, right? This question of, is she being silenced? She clearly thinks so. The people supporting her think so. Republicans say it's about playing by the rules. It is raising again yet another question about the power of a democratically elected lawmaker, right, representing their constituents, having the ability to represent them at a state house.
Yeah, absolutely. And not a big surprise to anyone, Hallie, that this came down to a party line vote. 68 Republicans voting for this punishment, the 32 Democrats voting against it. So Zephyr will be able to retain her seat. She'll be able to vote remotely, but as you mentioned, she won't be able to participate in any of the debate on the House floor. Of course, this comes 2 weeks after those Tennessee lawmakers were expelled, the Democratic lawmakers were expelled. And so a lot of people talking about this. Zephyr called this decorum being used as a tool of oppression. Here's more of what she had to say on Meet the Press.
This decision is a doubling down of the silencing of 11,000 Montanans. Every time a bill is up on the House floor for the remainder of the session, budget bills, housing bills, etc., there will be 11,000 Montanans whose voices aren't heard in that debate.
Right. She was voted into office to represent those in her district who now won't have anybody who is able to participate in debates. It's important to note that the legislative session is scheduled to end next week, so this won't go on terribly long. But what happens when they are next in session, Hallie?
Talk to me about the underlying point of some of this, right, which is that bill, the proposal that led to all of this in the first place, right, the discussion around it here, access that trans kids have to medical care. Where does that stand?
Right. And so that is still up for debate. She, of course, won't be participating in it. This is a bill that would ban funding for any type of surgery, for gender-affirming care for young people, a ban on the use of puberty blockers, on cross-sex hormones, also restricting when kids can change their name or change their pronouns and requiring parental consent to do so. And Zephyr was talking about what she said on the House floor when she said that the Republican lawmakers would have blood on their hands. And she said, this is not me being hyperbolic. This is me having talked to a family who says their child actually attempted suicide while watching a debate on this legislation, Hallie.
Kristen Dahlgren, thank you very much. So listen, you are looking live right now, or you're about to be looking live right now at what is the biggest test of power for Kevin McCarthy since he got elected Speaker of the House. That is because there is this vote happening now, a key vote on a debt ceiling bill that would take a must-pass plan to prevent the country from not being able to pay the bills it owes and use this thing, the debt ceiling limit, to try to roll back spending, roll back some big parts of President Biden's agenda, like student loan debt forgiveness and green energy tax credits. But for now, forget the policy just for 1 second, because whatever gets passed in the House, it's DOA in the Senate, okay? Instead, think about the politics here. Just getting this thing to the floor has taken some wrangling in a very divided Republican conference. And if Speaker McCarthy has enough of his Republicans voting for it, by the time it's gavelled, that would be a symbolic win for him. Question is, can he get there? What happens next? Garrett Haake is joining us now. And I was talking and I missed what the vote count was. Not that it matters because we don't call it till it's gavelled. I know. But even if it does pass the House, it's not going anywhere in the Senate. Talk to me about Speaker McCarthy, who thinks he can get this over the finish line. He's been feeling confident about this, but this really is the biggest moment for him, the first really tough vote since that 15 votes to get him Speaker in the first place.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. And I'm having January flashbacks to that Speaker vote as we watch the vote on the floor here. It's on a knife's edge right now with 4 Republicans already voting against this bill. If that number ticks up to 5 and stays at 5, this bill will not pass. I can tell you that would come as a surprise to McCarthy. He had some of his closest allies brief reporters earlier today about kind of the behind-the-scenes movement of how this bill came together. He has scheduled a press conference for right now, basically, the minute this vote is gavelled. He's expected to talk to reporters and tout this big victory here. If he doesn't get that victory, it would be a major political blow to McCarthy. McCarthy understands that this bill is not going to become law. The Democratic Senate says they're not taking it up. Joe Biden has said he'd veto it. But this is the ante. This is something he basically has to prove to the White House and 2 Senate Democrats that he can get 218 votes for something that has the words debt limit in it. 218 Republican votes before they will take him seriously. Now, whether or not they choose to do so is another matter. But this is kind of the first step that he's got to clear. And right now, he is sort of teetering on that step as we speak.
It's super interesting to me, Garrett, because you're right. I mean, you said knife's edge. That's what it is, as I'm watching these numbers here. And I, too, am having January flashbacks. So, like, who's huddling with who on the House floor, et cetera. What's the issue? Like, in other words, not to get in the weeds of, like, the so-called 5 families or whatever. I mean, the House Republican Conference is a fractured bunch. They have some groups with different interests, different priorities, et cetera. What's the pinch point for McCarthy in this vote? Because it is the toughest one yet that he's had to bring since he's been Speaker.
Yeah, right now the problem seems to be, based on the folks who are voting no, is that they don't believe this bill is conservative enough. It's Matt Gaetz and Andy Biggs, names that would be familiar to those of us who remember January, who apparently don't think this bill goes far enough. The reality check here is this is as far as any bill is going to go. Whatever the House Republicans pass right now will be the most conservative thing that gets passed that has anything to do with this issue. So some of these people might also just be people who've decided they really hate Kevin McCarthy. Matt Gaetz has pretty much been in that crew. So has Andy Biggs. They might not vote yes on anything that he puts to the floor where he really needs them.
We will find out when the vote closes, when the vote is gavelled. We shall see. Garrett Haake, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Coming up, some more developing news into us. The former star of the Fugees, Pras Michel, found guilty in a big political conspiracy case. We're going to have more on that just after the break. Plus, Steven Spielberg says he made a mistake when he edited ET for the re-release, what he now regrets changing. And Adnan Syed's legal team asking a court to reconsider its decision to reinstate his murder conviction. What comes next? Later in the local. Okay, some news just breaking to us in the last couple of minutes. A former member of the Fugees has been convicted of 10 finance-related federal charges, including money laundering and campaign finance violations. You probably remember the Fugees, 90s. Pras Michel, he was part of it with Lauryn Hill and Wyclef Jean. But Michel has now been found guilty of using illegally obtained money to get closer to former President Obama during his 2012 campaign and using millions more to bankroll an expensive lifestyle. NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos joins me now. We have laid out the charges against Pras Michel, now found guilty. And the details here are pretty interesting. Talk us through it and your reaction to what we're learning in the last couple of minutes.
Yeah, this may be colored by the fact that I am a defense attorney, and I actually recently defended money laundering charges in federal court. And money laundering charges are very broadly written as a statute and can be, in my opinion, relatively easy for the government to prove. But in addition, you have FARA violations. That involves an agent of a foreign. Yeah, exactly. It's a law that prohibits, or I should say requires at least registration if you're working on behalf of a foreign national. It's the kind of thing that became widely learned or known during the Paul Manafort era several years ago. But I would argue before that, there were not a lot of regular citizens that knew about FARA, and there weren't a whole lot of FARA violation prosecutions in this country going back a couple decades. So it's not something that's generally known. That's why I think it's a possibility this defendant probably really didn't know that the mere distinction that he was doing the bidding of a foreign national as opposed to somebody else made such a difference. Just to give you an example, one of the allegations was that one of his co-defendants, a foreign national, gave this defendant $20 million to get a photograph with President Obama. Now, if it didn't involve a foreign national and it didn't involve President Obama, if somebody gave me $20 million to get a photograph with Hallie Jackson, I would take that money. It would be lawful, and I wouldn't tell Hallie Jackson how much I was getting paid. And I would definitely try to get that picture done, and it wouldn't be a violation. The existence of that political angle and the foreign national is what makes some of these things criminal. A lot of citizens don't know it.
Danny Savalos, thank you very much. Appreciate it. To something else we've been talking about a lot now, the idea of famous books or whatever, TV shows, movies, getting edited, right, to fit a more modern lens, to be less offensive or more inclusive. And now, tonight, it's director Steven Spielberg, who says he regrets editing Guns out of the 20th anniversary re-release of E.T. Listen to what he said.
That was a mistake. I never should have done that because E.T. is a product of its era. And it's not, no film should be revised based on the lenses we now are either voluntarily or being forced to peer through.
You can see it right here, side by side on your screen. On the left is the original 1982 version, FBI agents coming in holding guns. In the updated version, 2002, they're holding walkie-talkies. The director, at the time 100 Summit Tuesday, saying he was sensitive to having federal agents with guns going after kids. But as you heard him say, he said nothing should be revised to fit today's lens, or he didn't think in this instance that was appropriate. Over the last few months, you know, we've talked about it. There's been backlash over how much stuff like books should get changed for today's readers, whether that's removing offensive language altogether or changing the words a little bit, including books like Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and James and the Giant Peach, and multiple Agatha Christie novels as well, including the ones you see there. Aaron Gilchrist is joining us now. Spielberg has talked about this before, right? Which is why in the 30th anniversary edition of the movie, which came out 10 years later, he unedited the edit, right?
Right, absolutely. So 3 versions sort of this movie that is a classic and beloved by so many generations. The 1982 version where you did see the guns in that particular scene we were talking about there. And Spielberg said that he was a little taken aback by some of the backlash he got from seeing those guns in the original. So when they did the home video version for the 20th anniversary, they edited in these walkie-talkies that we see here. And Spielberg, again, sort of thought of himself as self-censoring in that space and said, you know what, when we do the DVD Blu-ray version for the 30th anniversary, I'm going to go back to the original version of the film and stay true to what the history was of the moment. This is what was in the film. This is a record of what was okay in 1982.
He is touching on something so zeitgeisty, though, because the idea of, I wrote it down, he said, a product of its era. The idea that a work is the product of its era is something that there are some questions about now, specifically as it relates not necessarily to E.T., but to the books that we talked about. Right? The idea that, like, should Agatha Christie have those novels changed a bit in order to fit today's modern lens here? Spielberg talked a little bit about that, too.
Yeah, and publishers will tell you that books are tweaked and revised from time to time as, you know, if a new cover is produced for a book, they may change some of the words without changing the meaning of the story. But in this case, the concern is that there's sort of a slippery slope, right? How far is too far? How much is too much? And so Spielberg addressed this idea of changing books. In particular, we talk about the doll books and Agatha Christie, James Bond novels. Listen to what Spielberg said about that.
Nobody should ever attempt to take the chocolate out of Willy Wonka, ever. For me, it is sacrosanct. It's something that is our history. It's our cultural. It's our cultural heritage.
It's our cultural heritage is the point that he's making, that it is a reflection of the times when we look at these pieces from the 80s or from the 60s or from the 40s, whatever the time period may be, and that we lose some of our history if we make a lot of edits to make it more palatable or less insensitive in modern times.
Aaron Goldcrest, thank you. Interesting stuff. A lot of conversation about this one. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Southern Bureau, a woman in Florida has pleaded guilty to dressing up as a clown and shooting and killing her husband's first wife more than 30 years ago. She was arrested back in 2017 on first-degree murder charges. She's pleading guilty now, but still insists she is not the killer. Her plea is part of a deal that will probably have her out of prison in less than 2 years. Also out of our Southern Bureau, the disgraced CEO of Theranos, former Elizabeth Holmes, has her 11-year prison sentence delayed. She was supposed to report to prison tomorrow in Houston, but she'll stay out on bail thanks to a last-minute appeal of her original fraud conviction. The court has until May 3rd to respond. Out of our Midwest Bureau, attorneys for Adnan Syed are asking a Maryland court to reconsider its decision to reinstate his murder conviction. Syed became famous, got a lot of attention after the hit podcast Serial came out, and was released in September after a judge vacated his conviction. Last month, the lower court said that the victim's family didn't have enough heads up about the decision and that the hearing has to be repeated. Still to come, controversial QB Aaron Rodgers getting a New York welcome today.
This is a surreal day for me.
What his entry means for a team that hasn't won a Super Bowl since 1969. Stay with us. We are getting our first glimpse of Aaron Rodgers in New York Jets green, with the controversial quarterback getting his new number 8 jersey, not shying away from the fact he could be running out of chances to win the Super Bowl.
You know, I'm an old guy, so I want to be a part of a team that can win it all. And I believe that this is a place we can get that done.
So a lot of people wanted to see Aaron Rodgers at the Jets practice facility. It was packed, so packed we tried to get a reporter in there, but we're told, no, there are no more seats available. You see Rodgers here right when he walked in, being greeted right away by Jets owner Woody Johnson in a video he tweeted out. Corey Robinson is joining us now with all the controversy Rodgers brings, right? Today's presser really seemed focused on football. He acknowledged at one point, coming out of the darkness, as he described it, of this spiritual retreat he went on, feeling ready to play again.
Yes, thankfully we're talking about football now, Hallie, and you know it's interesting because this Jets team is, I mean, it's really good, but I think that we often forget the cost of bringing in a superstar talent like Aaron Rodgers to a team like this that's built up a good enough base. The reality is it happened to the Rams. And it happened to the Bucks. It's going to be a championship and then just an exodus, like just scorched earth. It happens every time, Hallie.
But it's one thing to play in Green Bay, right? Like, I shouldn't say that. Like, Green Bay and New York, they're both great. Neither one is better than the other. But he's in a real spotlight here in New York. And they really, really want to see, obviously, a win. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on him.
No, there's a lot of pressure. But, I mean, look, Aaron Rodgers is fundamentally, like a gunslinger. He is one of the greatest football players of all time. And he's playing, I know last season was not great. He didn't have any receivers. Now he has Garrett Wilson. The defense of the Jets is just top-notch, right? So, especially led by Sauce Gardner. So, I mean, this is the team that could do it in year one. It's very possible. But I just remind myself of what Zach Wilson, I don't know if you remember this, Zach Wilson got drafted, and on the stage on draft night, he said, I'm bringing a Super Bowl to New York. And I was like, oh, no, 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 no. And now this opportunity might be a chance for Aaron Rodgers actually to fulfill those words.
Were you at all surprised at some of the stuff that has been so controversial about Rodgers, his position on vaccines, for example, et cetera, that none of that came up, or did that seem par for the course to you?
When I was watching the presser, Hallie, there was this moment where, they tried a couple times at press and say, what were your conversations like with Green Bay? And back to your earlier point about, this big media market, Rodgers knows the game. He's one of those guys who's extremely sensitive of what goes out, what kind of word choice to use. So he said a couple times, I'm not going to go into the specifics of that conversation here or there, and that was kind of his way to deflect. I honestly don't think being in New York will be that big of a difference for him. And, like what he does with Pat McAfee, I honestly think this might be a nice kind of segue into a second career because, I mean, he's very interested in manipulating media, and this is the place to do it.
Corey Robinson, thank you very much. Appreciate it. That does it for us this hour. More coverage picks up right now. We are coming on the air with a slow-moving disaster. The intense flooding we're seeing along the Mississippi River tonight, with water levels going up, hail coming down, not just in the Midwest, but in one of the country's most famous national parks. We're going to have live reports from Iowa and California. Plus, like a scene out of the Shawshank Redemption, a guy who escaped from jail on the run after allegedly killing a man, getting into a shootout with police that ended in a building on fire. 3 more inmates still on the run. What we're just now hearing from somebody who knew the victim. Also breaking in just the last 10 minutes, Kevin McCarthy, the House Speaker, has passed his first big test in that role, a narrow but symbolic victory. He's talking literally right now. We're going to turn around what he says and bring it to you in a second. Plus, First Republic Bank may be on the brink with a lot of concerns. Could it collapse soon? And what does that mean for your money? We're getting into it. Plus, Montana Republicans kicking out the first openly transgender lawmaker in the state, not out of office, simply off the House floor. Her reaction on NBC News Now in just the last little bit, later on in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and as we're coming on the air tonight, there is a new tornado watch in a rural part of Texas just south of Fort Worth. It is possible that a tornado could touch down any minute now in this place that's part of the region where 22 million people are bracing for terrible storms, from the Midwest out to Florida. Golf ball-sized hail. More tornadoes, as we just laid out, possible in the next few hours in big cities like Dallas, Wichita Falls, in addition to the area around Fort Worth. We saw the Texas governor just activating emergency responders there. We're even just getting a look at some hail coming down, believe it or not, in Florida. That's right, the east side of Florida. To see this amount of hail there, that is very unusual. You don't see that every day. Out in the Midwest, it's what our climate unit calls a slow-moving disaster. The Mississippi River is getting so much water from snow melting up north, so the river is rising to near historic levels. Look at this. This is a park right along the river in one town in Wisconsin, in La Crosse. In Davenport, Iowa, crews are out building heavy-duty flood walls. You see them there. About an hour north, Dubuque is closing all of its floodgates for only the 3rd time in 50 years. This is just going to get worse, as some of these towns aren't even close to the peak water level. You see this, La Crosse, we just showed you that. It's expected to crest not until tomorrow. Dubuque, Saturday. Davenport and Burlington, Monday. Out west in California, all of Yosemite Valley will shut down starting Friday because of concerns of flooding there. That's because it's going to get really warm really fast, and there's a lot of snow that could melt. It would need somewhere to go. You can see here where Yosemite National Park, the Central Sierras, right now 2.5 times the amount of average snow for this time of year. Southern Sierras 3 times as much. Northern twice as much. Steve Patterson is in California watching things there. But I want to get to Maggie Vespa in Davenport on all of this issue at the Mississippi River. And we keep saying slow-moving disaster, Maggie, because that's what it is. This is not a hurricane coming and pouring through. This is not 6 feet of snow. This is inch by inch, and that's the concern.
Inch by inch, but as you can see, I mean, it is jarring. Like, the reality is jarring, and people here in Davenport, Iowa, are just kind of now coming to terms today with the fact that this could be a very historic, very dangerous, very damaging flood. Hallie, I mean, I'm standing in the river, right? You talked about, I think it was La Crosse, Wisconsin, a park that's already submerged. This is another park here in Davenport that's already submerged. I'm standing on a road that's usually next to a park that then runs along the river. So the Mississippi typically is several hundred yards that way. And now I'm in it. As you can see, the lamppost behind me, the buildings, the supposed pavilion, all of this submerged, obviously, within just a couple of days. And we talked about when these levels are supposed to peak. Davenport, Iowa, kind of the latest on that calendar. We're not expected to crest here until Monday. And in the last 24 hours, this water has kind of moved up at least 1 city block from the river's banks. So people here kind of doing the math a little bit, walking this forward, are starting to, Hallie, get really scared about what this might look like early next week.
Maggie, it's not just the impact. I mean, I'm sort of struck by this visual, right? Because you're not out like in the middle of the river. You're on what's usually a road. Normally, people can drive where you are standing there, right? Now, it is along the river. The concern, though, is like infrastructure, meaning, for example, gas. There's one company where you are that says it's already turned off gas to 80 people. That number is expected to go up. I mean, that's part of the impact from this.
Right, and that's a huge deal because, again, yeah, we're along the river, sure, and Davenport's along the river, but these people, because of that, are seasoned. They've been through floods before, and we talked to people just down the road here, just down the river, in Pleasant Valley. It's basically a suburb of Davenport. And one woman we talked to, she said, I've lived here for 12 years. They've never cut off my gas before. They've never been worried enough to do that I can ever remember. But it's happening in that community. The gas company says they'll do it to as many homes as they need to as the water encroaches, because that presents an obvious safety issue. Still, people in that community and kind of around, as word spreads that this is happening, they're really thrown by it. Take a listen.
We've never had a problem in all the years I've been out here with any problems with gas, any water getting in their lines. They're worried about their stuff. They're not worried about our stuff or our comfort.
And the woman we talked to, by the way, who again has been there for 12 years, she said, you know, what really concerns me is there's a lot of people here in this community who are elderly, a lot of people who are lower income. They don't have the money to go grab a hotel for a few nights or more while this plays out. And she says, you know, flood insurance sometimes pays for the damage of a flood, but who's going to take care of a hotel if you have to go and evacuate in that way? Who's going to take care of all your food that gets destroyed? Who's going to take care of the damage here as we just watch this, again, slow-moving disaster, Hallie, basically come to fruition? Hallie.
Maggie Vespa, thank you for being there for us. I appreciate it. I want to bring in Steve Patterson, who's covering all things California. And Steve, different region, different water basin, same issue here, right? With the snow melting, needs somewhere to go. It's going into Yosemite Valley, and that's why they are on alert for this here. How long is it going to be shut down? Do we know?
Well, it's not only the expectation of what's going to happen here, it's the whiplash of being in California, the most weather volatile state in the entire country. We went from a 23-year mega drought to all of a sudden 31 back-to-back atmospheric rivers to now dealing with a situation where we're talking about severe flooding across California. We don't know how long it's going to be shut down. Yosemite is what we're talking about. It's 90 degrees expected to be heading into the weekend. It sounds like, oh, you know, it could often be 90 degrees in a place like Yosemite. Well, it's really dangerous now because any heat wave is going to start releasing some of that snow melt that we have up in the Sierra Mountains as we speak here in California. We basically have like a lake worth of water up there that is just sitting, waiting to melt. When it comes down, there is no question it will absolutely, compared to talking to every scientist that I've spoken to here, it will flood in certain places. It will certainly flood in the Central Valley where there's already some water down down in the Tulare Basin right now. There's about 600 homes that have been affected. There's 37 that have been destroyed alone just from what's happening there. But this is going to happen in several places across the state. The question is, will it happen in places where we've divested away from flood protection and levees and our dams because of that drought that we just spoke about? A lot of the money and even the latest budget that we're supposed to go to floodplain protection has actually gone to the drought. So what happens then? That's the big question that's facing the state. It is a slow motion disaster here, just as it is everywhere else, although it could be a whole lot worse if we get one of these heat waves quicker than we think. And it's already happening this weekend, as we're saying. Hallie?
Steve Patterson live for us in California. Much to watch in the days to come, Steve. Thank you. To Mississippi now, where you're about to see the all-hands-on-deck scene after police closed in on a guy who escaped from jail and may have killed a pastor while on the run, setting off a multi-state manhunt that ended with a shootout from a burning building. You catch all that? I mean, it's a lot, right? Our team just got some video of that building coming in. Look at this. You can see the fire, the flames, smoke everywhere. Here's what led up to this, right? The suspect here, Dylan Arrington, is now believed to be dead. He'd been charged with stealing a car and having a firearm as a convicted felon. In jail, and then one of 4 inmates who escaped on the run. But unlike the others, investigators say Arrington killed 62-year-old pastor Anthony Watts. We've got some surveillance video in from our station down near Jackson. Police say that somebody crashed his motorcycle and fell down this hill. Then you're going to see a red pickup truck backing up. That's where they say they found Watts's body. Here's what we know tonight. Police say they believe that Arrington, the escaped inmate, started firing at them, then barricaded himself inside a building that then burst into flames. We say they believe it's him because they haven't confirmed it's his body just yet. We also know that a public works truck from Hinds County, where Jackson is, somehow turned up over near Houston. As for the other 3 people who escaped, they are still on the run. Katie Beck is following this story for us. And Katie, our Blaine Alexander just sat down with a fellow pastor at the church where Anthony Watts preached. And his friend was getting emotional, talking about the kind of person this pastor was.
Yeah, this is someone that's been friends with him since high school and describes him as someone who would give you the shirt off their back. He got emotional talking about the vigil that the community had last night for the pastor and how people were, sharing their remembrances of someone who was kind and soft-spoken and gentle. And he says there really was no need for this to happen. He says that pastor would have given the man whatever he had. There was no reason to take his life. Here's what he said.
If the man would have asked or told him to give me your truck, he would have gave it to him.
He would have done it.
Yes. Yes. But he was going to talk to him first, try to save him.
Again, sort of fitting, the last act of this pastor was that of a good Samaritan, seeing this disabled motorcycle on the side of the road and stopping to try and help, not realizing that it was an escaped inmate with a violent tendency. Hallie?
We're seeing this tweet from the Hinds County Sheriff with surveillance video here of one of the other 3 escapees in Texas. What's the sense of these other 3 inmates who are still out there? Are they getting tracked down? Do we know?
Well, the sheriff expressed confidence. He feels like they're on the right track. Obviously, seeing that surveillance video certainly gives police an indicator of where this one inmate was, at least on Sunday morning. That's the first visual we have seen, really, of any of these inmates since they escaped. He says he does feel confident. There are 7 different agencies that are all part of this massive manhunt stretching from Mississippi to Texas. He seems to think that it's only a matter of time before he closes in on the rest.
Katie Beck, thank you very much for that. A little bit of breaking news as we're on the air here. A symbolic but narrow win for House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in the first big test of his speakership since he was elected, with a debt ceiling bill now passed in a 217 to 215 vote. That means a plan will move forward to prevent the country from not being able to pay the bills it owes. That would be the hope with this plan, this particular bill, that would cut spending and roll back some big parts of President Biden's agenda, like student debt forgiveness and green energy tax credits. Now, that is not, here's why that's not going to happen. It's DOA in the Senate, right? So forget about the policy just for 1 second, because even though the House passed it, the Senate almost certainly will not. talk about the politics here, because this has taken some wrangling in a very divided Republican conference. I want to bring in Garrett Haake, who's covering all of it for us. And Garrett, this was not a slam dunk win for Kevin McCarthy. However, he kept enough people close enough together for long enough that he was able to get this over the finish line for now.
Yeah, look, to build on your basketball metaphor, it makes me think of the NCAA tournament where they talk about survive and advance, that at the end of the day, the score doesn't matter. You just win and move on to the next game. And I think that's the way that House Republicans are going to look at this. They won this vote by the narrowest possible margin. One vote goes the other way, or one person who voted yes is absent, and this bill does not pass. So they got the vote, they got the win that they needed today, and they advanced to the next round. Now, that next round is trying to put additional pressure on Joe Biden to meet with them and discuss some other bill that may have a chance of becoming law. But Hallie, you look at this, I mean, this was such a narrow bill. There's no room for error here. So if a bill that comes out of that negotiation moves a little to the right, you potentially have moderates fall off. It moves a little to the left, you have hardliners fall off. Now, maybe you could replace them with Democrats, but that's going to cause a whole other problem for Speaker McCarthy. And so the narrowest possible victory, but it does advance the Republican goals here of trying to move towards a negotiation with the president.
In about the last 6 minutes, here's what Speaker McCarthy said about this. Watch.
We were the only body that passed anything. Why do you assume the Senate can pass anything? Because I haven't seen them do anything. So right now, this is the only place that has lifted the debt limit.
Garrett, to your point, this is now like a negotiating tool, a negotiating tactic.
Yeah, look, I mean, this has been McCarthy's tactic, even behind closed doors, to get votes for this bill. It's the only game in town. Right now, there is one bill that has moved to raise the debt limit, and it's his. And his point that whether the Senate can move something, you know, it doesn't appear that the Senate could move a clean debt ceiling increase, something that only does that and doesn't have other policies attached to it, because Senate Republicans have said, we're going to sit back and let the Speaker negotiate this. Mitch McConnell kind of dove in the last discussion and helped provide votes for a clean debt ceiling increase. He said he's not going to do that again this time. And so, you know, it does increase the pressure on Senate Democrats and on the White House to do something, either to prove they've got the votes for something else or to start those negotiations, which they have consistently said, including the president this afternoon, that they're not going to do.
Garrett, let me ask you, we hate to tend to do this here, is like the screech 180 pivot to a totally different topic. But just to pull back the curtain, I think it was either on your way to this live shot or leaving the last live shot you did for us, you got in an elevator with Elon Musk, who showed up on the Hill today, and everybody was like, why is Elon Musk coming to Capitol Hill to meet with people? You found out why on this elevator ride with him. Tell us about it.
That's right. Elon Musk was here meeting with Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader. He told me they were talking about the future. I asked him to be a little bit more specific about that. He said AI and the economy. Look, these are all issues that are going to be tied up in bills that come forward in the next, in this current Congress. And really, when you consider how kind of vast Musk's portfolio is, things like the infrastructure bill affects him, the Inflation Reduction Act and tax credits for electric vehicles affect him. Even the social media bill that I've been talking about in some other reporting affects him. It was a very brief conversation and an interesting one on a weird day here, Hallie. So far today in the Capitol, I've seen Elon Musk, Anthony Edwards, that's Goose from Top Gun, and Ronald McDonald and Grimace on Capitol Hill today. I don't know what to make of that.
Can't wait to see who you're going to see next. Please report back at 7 o'clock. Thank you, Garrett. Appreciate it. To the White House now with President Biden tonight. And the most fulsome response he's had yet to critics say he's too old to serve a second term, just as he's announcing his official re-election campaign. Watch. Well, that was going to be the president speaking. And the president basically said, listen, people will watch his performance, watch and see how he does, that he thought long and hard about it. He says they're going to have to judge whether I have it or I don't have it. He said he took a hard look at himself before he decided to run, and he felt good. The reason why this matters is because of the poll you see on screen here, with half of people saying that President Biden's age, he would be 82 on Inauguration Day, is a major reason to oppose him. 20% say it is somewhat or a minor reason to oppose him. It's also showing, our new polling today, a country divided over those so-called culture wars. You've got 50% of people saying we should be promoting greater respect for traditional social values. 42% say there should be more tolerance for people who live a little bit of a different life, different backgrounds. That split, right, this culture war picture, probably important to anybody trying to keep or take the White House in 2024. NBC's Kayla Tausche is joining us now. Interesting to hear from President Biden on this. I'm going to be honest with you, Kayla. Our tapes aren't rolling right now. We're going to figure that out, but that's why we couldn't hear from President Biden in that Rose Garden news conference today. That said, he was asked about this. He addressed it pretty head on. And while some of his supporters may not like that age keeps coming up, some of the Democrats I talked to acknowledge it is going to be a question. They can't change it. They can't roll back time and make him 42 again, right? So, like, it is what it is.
And the president even acknowledged if he were a voter, a young voter, he would probably want to weigh that as a consideration as well. I think the president's team knows that they're going to have to be on defense about this. I mean, it's been so well telegraphed that they are prepared for all of these attacks to come, but they're probably getting a little bit of solace from the fact that even top Republicans are split over whether it should really be a prominent attack in this election. Peter Nicholas and Mike Memley have a piece out today quoting, some top Republican consultants, even Senator Lindsey Graham, saying that, they're not certain that age is the reason why they believe President Biden's policies aren't working in their views. And because former President Trump's age is not that far behind, perhaps it's not going to be an effective attack from Republicans either. But either way, we are expecting President Biden to try to make this election a referendum on former President Trump. If the sound works now, let's try to play this one from the president.
I know him well, and I know the danger he presents to our democracy, and we've been down this road before. I think I still would be running if he wasn't. I do know him well. He's not hard to know.
I mean, you mentioned some of that polling earlier, Hallie. The culture wars are also going to get huge play in this election. Take, for example, the treatment of transgender people. In the poll that NBC News ran last week, 48% say the country has gone too far in accepting transgender people. 43% say the country has not gone far enough. So you see just in that split screen, there's really no middle ground. And when it comes to this debate over wokeness, 51% of respondents say they have a less favorable opinion of people or companies described as woke. 27% say that they view them as more favorably. So I think on that issue specifically, aides for the White House and the campaign suggest that perhaps they'll have to fight the culture wars on the trail, but the election itself will be fought at the margins over issues like abortion and LGBT rights, which they hope the independent and swing voters are with Democrats and not with Republicans.
Kayla Tausche live for us outside the White House. Kayla, thank you. China today announcing that its former ambassador to Russia is going to head to Ukraine to try to negotiate maybe a political settlement. That's what China's president calls it, a political settlement to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That's after a phone call, a big deal phone call between the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, you see him here, and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Zelensky saying in a tweet he hopes the long and meaningful conversation will give a powerful impetus to the development of our bilateral relations. In plain English, right, that means that he hopes that something will come of this. But there is some skepticism from critics who wonder if China can really be an unbiased negotiator here, especially considering who it selected to do the negotiations in the first place. Keira Simmons is joining us now. Explain how the pieces of the puzzle connect or don't here.
Well, Hallie, before we just get into that last piece that you spotlighted, let's just build up some more context like this. Since the trip by Secretary Blinken to China was cancelled because of the spy balloon scandal, it's been very difficult for US diplomats to even get Chinese counterparts on the phone. Plainly, US diplomats aren't really that interested in sitting down with their Russian counterparts. And here you have President Xi picking up the phone to President Zelensky, American ally, and now sending, frankly, his top Russian diplomat to Ukraine and other countries in Europe, we think. This guy, and we showed you last hour, but I think it really tells a story to show his resume. Li Hu, 70 years old. Back in 1981, he became the second secretary to the Chinese embassy in Moscow. Then he became the first secretary. He spent some time in Kazakhstan and in Beijing, but again, as the Russia expert in Beijing in the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Then for 10 years, he's the Chinese ambassador to Russia. At the end of all that, President Putin awards him a Russian Order of Friendship. This guy knows Russia. I've been talking to a Russian expert on China who knows him well, Li Hu, and he says that he reads Russian classics like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. He's fluent in Russian. He helped negotiate over Crimea back in 2014 and says Moscow won't be worried because he really understands Russian politics. So what President Xi has done here is he's planning to send somebody that Moscow won't be concerned about while he's signaling to the Ukrainians and the Europeans, hey, I'm negotiating. I'm being the good guy. Now, of course, as you suggest, lots of skepticism. China's actually on Russia's side. But right now, the way we look at it, it looks right now, China's just put itself in the middle of potential negotiations, US on the sidelines.
Keir Simmons, it is a fascinating geopolitical look at the dynamics here. Keir, it's good to see you. Thank you. Let's get to business now, because First Republic Bank is seeing its shares tank something like 30% today. Trading actually had to be stopped like a dozen times after a 50% drop yesterday. This matters because it is raising concerns, big picture, about how stable the sort of financial ecosystem is here in this country. First Republic is saying, hey, we need help. It's already gotten a $30 billion bailout from 11 other big banks, although advisors to First Republic are trying to convince them to come up with even more. Brian Chung is joining us now. So what does this say, Brian? Big, right? Like, help us take this out of the world of, God bless them, CNBC, and put him into the world of, like, why I should care sitting at my house here. This is a big deal.
Yeah, well, I mean, because it's bringing back the fears from about 6 weeks ago that maybe the banks are not in good shape. Now, for what it's worth, First Republic, the nexus for all of this was the earnings release that they had on Monday night, admitting that they lost about 40% of their deposits in the first 3 months of the year. That was way worse than the roughly 5% in deposit outflows that we saw in most of the other regional banks. That's according to Goldman Sachs Economics. That's the reason why the stock tanked yesterday, almost falling 50%, and then today falling almost another 30%. That stock, by the way, was almost $120 per share at the beginning of this year. So this is a stock that has really fallen a lot. Investors are not the depositors at this firm, and it's important to remember that if you are not banked at First Republic, you should not be concerned, because the deposit outflows that we've seen there are not happening at other regional banks. And again, as a reminder, for all FDIC insured institutions, your money is safe up to $250,000 per depositor. For most families, they're well below that limit, Hallie.
I was just going to have you just say, like, if you don't have money at First Republic Bank, you don't have to freak out here. And even if you do, I mean, there are some protections that are in place for this regional bank, Brian. I just think that's important to say, right?
Exactly. And worth mentioning as we continue to see these headlines, which might continue to crop up over the next few days, Hallie.
Brian Chung, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Coming up, lawyers, some breaking news just coming into our newsroom here. Lawyers for former President Donald Trump are doing something very interesting and very unique. They're asking Congress to get involved in that classified documents investigation against him. We're going to have more right after the break. Plus, a jury has just come back with a verdict in a trial that saw Leo DiCaprio and Jeff Sessions on the witness stand. What happens next for the rapper at the center of it all? Plus, why a U.S. Olympics long jumper just got stripped of her national title. That's in the 5 Things next. Let's get to that breaking news that's just coming into us here, because NBC News is learning that attorneys for former President Donald Trump are asking Congress to get involved into the Justice Department investigation against him as it relates to classified documents found in Mr. Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago. This is according to a letter obtained by NBC where this ask is made. Ken Delanian is covering this for us here. What is happening? Let me start there, and then we'll get into the context. What does this mean? I mean, this seems like a bit of a Hail Mary, is it?
Yes, I would view it more as a press release. And I think what we can intuit from this is the heat is really turning up in this classified documents investigation, because these lawyers are asking for help from House Republicans. They may as well ask for help from the Pope, because Congress has no say, none whatsoever, in what the Justice Department does in a criminal investigation. But what's interesting about this letter is they essentially lay out the Trump defense here. Which is that basically the Justice Department was mean and was too aggressive, and therefore and criminalized what should have been a negotiation between the National Archives and Donald Trump, and therefore it's spun out of control in a bad way. What they don't ever do in this letter is put up any kind of defense for the crime that we know the Justice Department is investigating, obstruction of justice. They talk about why Donald Trump may have had classified information at his home, and they say that they saw no evidence of any willful violation, that he didn't mean to do it. Essentially, a bunch of boxes were packed and stuff was brought there inadvertently. What they don't speak to are the allegations that the DOJ is looking at, that Trump knew he had classified information and lied to the Justice Department, or caused his lawyers to lie to the Justice Department and say that none was left. They portray that, a letter that they executed, as kind of an innocent mistake. They don't really fully explain it. But it is interesting. They do seize on some reporting that there was kind of a disagreement between the FBI and the Justice Department about whether and when to do that search. Now, I've confirmed that reporting. There was a disagreement. It's not the way these lawyers are portraying it, whereas the FBI didn't want to do anything. But the FBI did want to move more cautiously than some people at the DOJ. But nonetheless, we are where we are now, and these lawyers appear to be trying to sort of appeal to the public and Trump supporters and get his story out before potentially some charges come in this case, Hallie.
But I mean, and I want to be clear that we're moving into the realm a little bit of like what I would call, well, let me just say this. You said you can intuit from this letter. Like, in other words, if this is a bigger play to make this process seem more political, because obviously in this letter, these attorneys for Donald Trump are slamming Special Counsel Jack Smith, slamming the people who packed up his stuff, basically. Like, is it an indication that perhaps charges could come soon, or is that a bridge too far to read into that? And if, Ken, the answer is we can't read into it, we don't know, then that's fine. Just tell me.
Well, no, I'm adding this to all my other reporting that suggests that this investigation is nearing its end.
Interesting.
Not at the end, because there are outstanding witnesses who are under subpoena who have not appeared before the grand jury, my reporting tells me. But they've talked to almost everybody they possibly could, almost, with any connection to these documents, including the entire household staff of Mar-a-Lago. They've gotten Donald Trump's lawyer, Evan Corcoran, who's not on this letter because he has to recuse himself from this case, to testify before the grand jury. And so, you know, it's looking like it's reaching a decision point. Now, whether they will decide to bring this case is an open question, but it's clear to me from this letter that Donald Trump's lawyers are worried about that, and they want to muddy up the water here and accuse the DOJ of being political. And the whole point of appointing the special counsel was to try to get that, to get this investigation away from politics, but we all knew at the time that that was impossible.
Ken Delanian, interesting stuff. Thank you for jumping in front of a camera, scrambling there as this news is just coming into us. Appreciate it. In other news in the world of politics here, an extraordinary escalation tonight in the Disney versus DeSantis battle, with Florida's biggest tourist attraction, one of the most popular spots in the whole world, filing a new lawsuit today against the state that it's in. Disney is suing the Republican governor for, basically, they say, punishing the company for having an opinion against DeSantis' so-called Don't Say Gay law. Or in corporate speak, here's how Disney puts it: a relentless campaign to weaponize government power against Disney in retaliation for expressing a political viewpoint. Disney's essentially saying that Ron DeSantis and his team are retaliating against the company for speaking out against him. They say, hey, that violates our free speech rights. That hurts our business. This lawsuit is the latest and most significant move in a back-and-forth beef that's been going on for months now, punctuated by DeSantis' threats that could make the happiest place on earth a little more maybe annoyed. Like DeSantis is saying, hey, maybe they'll build some new toll booths on the roads into Disney. Maybe they'll do more inspections, which can be expensive, on rides. Maybe they'll let a state prison get built right near Disney's land. All of it as Governor DeSantis seems to be inching closer to declaring himself a candidate for president. He is on a world tour right now to visit some of America's closest allies, trying to show he can hold his own on the world stage. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is at this stop on that world tour with Governor DeSantis in Jerusalem live for us tonight. And Gabe, the political lens to this is fascinating as it relates not just to the 2024 run, but more broadly to DeSantis trying to make the case that he's pro-business. And yet here he is in this feud with Disney here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that is the argument that Disney is making right now, that the actions of Governor DeSantis are not just anti-business, that they're unconstitutional. And you laid it out quite well, Hallie. And a few segments ago, you were talking about the culture wars. This is a huge culture war issue that Governor DeSantis seems to be doubling down on, tripling down on, as he heads to a potential 2024 run. Now, you mentioned in this lawsuit, Disney calling this a targeted campaign of government retaliation orchestrated by Governor DeSantis. Now, for the last several months, you've seen this escalating feud with Governor DeSantis throwing all sorts of things out, including potentially building a state prison near Disney World. He floated that idea. He talked about more inspections on monorails. There's a talk about that in the Florida State Legislature right now. The Reedy Creek Special Tax District, that's the center of all this, that is now defunct. And that is exactly what happened today. It was dissolved, in this decades-old deal that allowed Disney self-governance in Florida went away, essentially. And Governor DeSantis and his allies and this new board he appointed are trying to wrestle back power from Disney. So all this is playing out, Hallie, as you mentioned, as the governor is on this overseas trade mission, a trip meant to attract jobs from several countries across the world. And now he's in this fight with the largest employer in his state, Hallie.
What is interesting here is the way that he is not just in a fight with one of the biggest employers in the state. He is now in a, and I don't want to say fight, but this is becoming an issue in the Republican primary campaign. I'm struck by Nikki Haley telling Disney, come on to South Carolina, right? Like opening her arms and saying that, and I think we have the tweet we can pull up, saying that they're not, South Carolina's not woke, but we're not sanctimonious about it either. Sanctimonious, of course, a not-so-subtle reference to the nickname that Donald Trump has bestowed upon Ron DeSantis here. There's like a lot to this that the governor has stepped in.
Yeah, of course. And Nikki Haley certainly, looking at this today, very quick to comment on this, that frankly is seen by, many Republicans that I have spoken with as well, especially down in Florida. They can't understand this line of attack here from Governor DeSantis, someone who has repeatedly said that it is his policies that have attracted businesses to Florida, and he would run on that as part of any presidential campaign. But yes, you mentioned Nikki Haley, of course, former President Trump, over the last couple of weeks has really doubled down on his attacks, saying that, essentially that Governor DeSantis has gotten destroyed by Disney. Even another potential presidential hopeful last week, Chris Christie, sounded off on this, saying that, he had concerns that Ron DeSantis was really a conservative based on this line of attack against Disney. So it's really puzzling a lot of people at this point. But over the last several weeks, as you know, Hallie, polls have Governor DeSantis losing ground against former President Trump after the former president's indictment. But still, Wall Street Journal poll in the last few days come out that he still faces in a head-to-head matchup with Joe Biden would edge him. And so he is still, for all intents and purposes, even though he hasn't officially announced yet, he's expected to do that potentially as early as next month, he is still the top potential contender to Donald Trump, and he's staking out this claim that Disney says is anti-business. Hallie?
Gabe Gutierrez live for us tonight in Jerusalem. Gabe, thank you. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, new numbers in from the FBI shows active shooters killed or hurt more than 300 people last year. The report says, while the number of incidents went down, the number of people shot went up, the highest in 5 years. The deadliest, of course, that horrific shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. 21 people were killed. Number 2, Fugees rapper Pras Michel has been convicted of 10 federal charges, including money laundering and campaign finance violations. He was accused of using illegally obtained money to get closer to former President Obama during his 2012 campaign. Michel's lawyer says they will appeal. Number 3, Hunter Biden's legal team meeting with prosecutors at the Justice Department today, apparently about potential charges they could file against him. That's according to 2 sources familiar with the matter. The DOJ and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware declined to comment. Hunter Biden's attorney did not immediately respond to comment. Prosecutors are considering charging the president's son with 3 tax crimes and a charge related to a gun purchase, according to sources familiar. Number 4, a U.S. long jumper was just stripped of a national title she won back in February. Why? Because she tested positive for marijuana, according to the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. 23-year-old Tara Davis Woodhull was also hit with a 1-month suspension, which she's already served. Number 5, do not toss those just expired Bed Bath & Beyond coupons just yet. If you can't use them by today, when of course they will expire after Bed Bath & Beyond declared bankruptcy this weekend, you can use them at the Container Store. The Container Store is saying, hey, if you want 20% off, bring them over here. And for a limited time, they will honor the coupon, which have taken on kind of a life of their own in the minds of savvy and thrifty shoppers. A lot more to get to on NBC News now, including a new study finding a whole bunch of people in the U.S. are being treated with a potentially dangerous mix of drugs, amphetamines, prescribed alongside depression and anxiety medications. Let's get to it, because researchers say that could lead to addiction or side effects we don't even know about yet. The study's lead author warning these prescription stimulants are highly potent, their words, and have a high potential for people to become dependent on them fast. Dr. Akshay Syal joins me now. Dr. Akshay, give us some, get real here, right? What kind of drugs are we talking about in these combos? Like, what are these cocktails and what's the danger here?
Hey, Hallie. So what we're looking at here are really Schedule II controlled substances. And for some context here, the DEA has a list of drugs that they classify into Schedule I, II, III, IV, or V based on their potential for abuse, and potential Class I being the most likely to be abused and Class V being the least. And so what we're talking about here are Level II substances like amphetamines or Adderall, oxycodone, fentanyl, some opiates, and even cocaine. I mean, what we're worried about here is people who are being prescribed stimulants, about almost 300,000 they found in this study, about half of them are also taking other substances on this list, such as antidepressants. And to answer your question, a real-life example, you know, if a patient comes in and they start taking an antidepressant, and that can bring them down a little bit, lower their energy, they can take a stimulant like Adderall to kind of come back up. And that's really what you're worried about is, you know, one drug bringing you down, another one bringing you back up. And what are really the side effects of that? That we don't know.
The new study showed that the way that people use these drugs, like patterns of using these drugs, go beyond what's actually been approved here. Now, that is not totally uncommon, right? There tends to be sometimes like off-label uses for different things. But does that raise any flags for you? What does that say here?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall in this country in general, we have a tendency to choose pills as a solution to problems, and it's hard to blame patients for that, right? For example, if you come in and you tell a doctor, I'm not feeling so great, I think I have depression, they say, would you want to see a therapist? And oftentimes we hear, you know, I don't have time for that. Is there something you can give me? Is there something that I can take over the counter? And, you know, I think that's where a lot of the problem is. And we're seeing, you know, over the last 2013 to 18, there was a study published that showed Adderall prescriptions are up 80%. So we're entering this world where we're turning to pills for a lot of our problems, and understandably so. The question is, when we start to add up a bunch of pills, what are the side effects of that? And really the most important advice I can give to your viewers right now is, if your doctor prescribes something, make sure you're really forthcoming in all the medications, all the over-the-counter supplements you're taking. We really want to watch for any potential interactions, Hallie.
It's an important conversation to have, Dr. Akshay, and I think it is also a sensitive one, right? Because we also know that medication can save lives. I mean, for things like depression, et cetera. I mean, that can be so critical for people, too.
Absolutely, absolutely. These drugs work. They work really well. Really, the warning is when you start to mix them together, what is the long-term data for that? And that's we really don't know.
Dr. Akshay Syal, great to see you. Thank you. When we come back, Montana lawmakers just voted to punish the state's first openly trans lawmaker, what she's telling NBC News tonight. In Montana tonight, state Republicans are voting to punish the first openly transgender lawmaker there. Democrat Zoe Zephyr officially will not be able to go to floor sessions or speak during them for the rest of the legislative session. Supporters say she's being silenced by Republicans for speaking out against a bill that bans gender-affirming care for trans kids. Here's what she said not too long ago with our own Chuck Todd. Watch.
There have been hearings and there have been moments on the floor where legislators have screamed in their closing, where legislators have insinuated that my very existence as a queer person is somehow sexualizing children. And we object to that.
Remember, protesters supporting Zephyr stormed the state capitol this week, essentially. 7 of them arrested. You can see them demonstrating, protesting in the balcony, yelling down to the floor. So what do Republicans say here, right? The House Speaker says Zephyr didn't follow the rules. Other critics accused her of using hateful rhetoric or even inciting an insurrection. Kristen Dahlgren joins us now. This is raising questions, especially in light of what we saw with the so-called Tennessee 3 in a different state in this country, about a elected lawmaker representing their constituents and issues of whether or not they can actually do that effectively in their state house.
Right, and this vote was right along party lines, 68 Republicans to 32 Democrats. And so the state majority leader had a lot to say about why they did this vote. And among the things she said, that Zephyr was sort of encouraging and continuing this disruption that put not just the lawmakers, but everybody in that legislative house, including the pages, at risk. Of course, Zephyr says that they're using this idea of decorum as oppression of her views and of her voters' views. So listen to a little bit more about what she had to say on Meet the Press.
This decision is a doubling down of the silencing of 11,000 Montanans. Every time a bill is up on the House floor for the remainder of the session, budget bills, housing bills, etc. There will be 11,000 Montanans whose voices aren't heard in that debate.
And so she also posted a picture of her, pressing her button to speak in the House as she was leaving. She will be able to vote, and will be able to Zoom in, but not able to speak and participate in these debates, which ultimately is part of our democratic system, Hallie.
Right, a part of the process there. What about the thing that is underlying all of this, Kristen, which is the status of this bill, basically, that would limit the access that trans kids have to gender-affirming medical care?
Right. And so this is a bill that has support in both houses of Montana's state legislature. It's about gender-affirming care. It bans funding for any type of surgery for youth. It bans any type of hormone blockers or opposite-sex hormones. It also would set an age limit on when somebody could change not just their name, but their pronouns, and it would require parental consent in order to change those pronouns or change the name that they go by. And so this is what all of this has been about, sort of this debate about it. And you'll recall that one of the things Zephyr said to the Republicans who support this is that I hope you see the blood on your hands. And she says now that she wasn't trying to use hyperbole in that. She has actually spoken to a family who says that their child attempted suicide while watching some of the debates on this bill. And so it's important to note that there are so many people in this country and in Montana, children and adults who identify as transgender, and ultimately that's what this is about.
Kristen Dahlgren, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, a new sculpture of King Charles, just unveiled ahead of his coronation, and you may not even guess what it's made of. Take a look. Get your guesses ready. I'll tell you the answer in 2 minutes. What do you think, Bert? NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our foreign desk has done it for you. Here's some of what they're watching in a new segment we call The Global. In Singapore, a man was hanged after being convicted of trying to traffic a little more than 2 pounds of cannabis. He wasn't actually caught with the cannabis, but prosecutors said he helped coordinate the delivery. His family and activists argued he was convicted on weak evidence. Under Singaporean law, trafficking more than 500 grams of cannabis can lead to the death penalty. From Rome, Pope Francis has given women the right to vote at an upcoming meeting of bishops. It's a change that makes history here, in line with the Pope's push to give women greater decision-making responsibilities in the Catholic Church. Until now, the only people who could vote at these meetings were men. Under the new changes, 5 religious sisters will join 5 priests as voting reps for religious orders. In the UK, check out this in honor of King Charles' coronation. It is a life-size bust. I ask you what it's made of. What do you think? It is chocolate. Straight up, chocolate, mini Snickers, some Mars bars, Twix bars on there too. Weighs like 50 pounds, took 4 weeks to make. It's gonna go on display at Mars Wrigley's UK headquarters. Don't put it near anything warm. Just keep it away from the heater. We don't wanna see any trippy Charles. So listen, director Steven Spielberg says he regrets editing Guns out of the 20th anniversary re-release of his movie E.T. And I want you to listen to why he says he regrets it. Watch.
That was a mistake. I never should have done that because E.T. is a product of its era. And it's not, no film should be revised based on the lenses we now are either voluntarily or being forced to peer through.
You can see it right here, side by side on your screen. On the one side is the original 1982 version where FBI agents are holding guns. On the other side, it's the updated 2002 version. They have walkie-talkies there, right? Like that's the update. Now, the director at Times 100 Summit Tuesday saying he was sensitive to having federal agents with guns going after kids, but said no film should be revised to fit today's lenses. Over the last few months, we've seen a lot of backlash over how much things like books are getting changed for today's readers, whether that's removing offensive language altogether or changing the words a little bit, including books like Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, multiple Agatha Christie novels, too. Aaron Gilchrist joins me now. Spielberg has talked about this before, right? Which is why in the 30th anniversary edition of the movie, which came out 10 years later, he unedited the edit, right?
Right, absolutely. So 3 versions sort of this movie that is a classic and beloved by so many generations. The 1982 version where you did see the guns in that particular scene we were talking about there. And Spielberg said that he was a little taken aback by some of the backlash he got from seeing those guns in the original. So when they did the home video version for the 20th anniversary, they edited in these walkie-talkies that we see here. And Spielberg, again, sort of thought of himself as self-censoring in that space and said, you know what, when we do the DVD Blu-ray version for the 30th anniversary, I'm going to go back to the original version of the film and stay true to what the history was of the moment. This is what was in the film. This is a record of what was okay in 1982.
He is touching on something so zeitgeisty, though, because the idea of, I wrote it down, he said a product of its era. The idea that a work is the product of its era is something that there are some questions about now, specifically as it relates not necessarily to E.T., but to the books that we talked about, right? The idea that, like, should Agatha Christie have those novels changed a bit in order to fit today's modern lens here? Spielberg talked a little bit about that, too.
Yeah, and publishers will tell you that books are tweaked and revised from time to time as, you know, if a new cover is produced for a book, they may change some of the words without changing the meaning of the story. But in this case, the concern is that there's sort of a slippery slope, right? How far is too far? How much is too much? And so Spielberg addressed this idea of changing books. In particular, we talk about the doll books and Agatha Christie, James Bond novels. Listen to what Spielberg said about that.
Nobody should ever attempt to take the chocolate out of Willy Wonka, ever. For me, it is sacrosanct. It's something that is our history. It's our cultural heritage.
It's our cultural heritage is the point that he's making, that it is a reflection of the times when we look at these pieces from the 80s or from the 60s or from the 40s, whatever the time period may be, and that we lose some of our history if we make a lot of edits to make it more palatable or less insensitive in modern times.
Eric, Chris, thank you. Interesting stuff. A lot of conversation about this one. Appreciate it. Still to come here on the show, controversial quarterback Aaron Rodgers making it official in New York today. Next. So we are getting our first glimpse of Aaron Rodgers in Jets green, with the controversial QB getting his new number 8 jersey and not shying away from the fact he could be running out of chances to win the Super Bowl.
You know, I'm an old guy, so I want to be part of a team that can win it all. And I believe that this is a place we can get that done.
The Jets practice facility was packed. It was so packed. We tried to get a reporter in there, but we were told, no, there are no more seats available. Okay. You see Rodgers here. This is the moment he walked into the building, being greeted right away by Jets owner Woody Johnson in a video he tweeted out. All as he's saying goodbye to his Packers family in a long Instagram post with a picture of the day he was drafted, promising it's not the end, that he will see you again, Green Bay. You'll always have my heart. Zach Rosenblatt covers the Jets for The Athletic. And I understand that you did, in fact, have a seat in the room during that news conference today. It was interesting here because the focus was really on football. I mean, there's a lot of directions this could go, but it was pretty strictly on Rodgers coming back to play.
Yeah, I think that was to be expected in an environment like this where you have so many people, there's a microphone, you're on national TV. I think, you know, when we're more, you know, by a block or things like that, I think that's maybe when you start hearing the hard-hitting questions, I would say.
You asked Rodgers about the pressure of New York, the idea of the media spotlight here, how he plans to work with reporters like you. I want to play a little bit of that.
I definitely have heard a lot about the media. You guys have a job to do. You're very good at it. I grew up in a small town. I think when you grow up in a tiny little town in Northern California, you dream about being in a big city.
I mean, it does seem like he's ready for this big moment. He's ready for this big spotlight.
Yeah, I mean, I think he knew what he was getting into when he decided to come to the Jets. I do wonder how it'll play out when, you know, if they have a loss, if he has a bad game, if he goes on the Pat McAfee show and starts talking about things that are a little controversial that you've alluded to, and how people in New York react to that. I'm curious to see how that plays out, but I think he knows what he was getting into. He knows there's more attention. He knows he's going to be on the back page of the newspapers every day. They're going to be following his every move. I've seen stories about him going out to get coffee in California recently, and there's going to be more like that where he's going to eat in New York City and things like that. And how he handles that is going to be a big part of how the season goes.
What surprised you most about being there today, talking with him?
I don't know if anything surprised me as much as, it kind of almost was as you expected. Like Aaron Rodgers, he's not afraid to answer any question. A Green Bay reporter came here and asked him about how things went wrong there, and he couldn't help but take a stab at the Green Bay Packers. Like, he's always going to say what's on his mind. And I think I'm fascinated to see how that plays in New York.
Zach Rosenblatt, I'm sure we'll be talking a lot frequently over the football season. Appreciate it. Appreciate you. Appreciate all of you for watching, by the way. That is a wrap for this hour and for the one before it. If you missed any of it, catch up on the newest reporting and latest interviews from our team. You can find us anytime in so many places, including Peacock, Hulu, YouTube, and more. Just search Hallie Jackson now. So glad you're with us. I'm out. I'm off for a bit, but I'll see you back next week. Top Story picks up our coverage right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.